It's a moment of high drama we just heard. Follow me, Jesus says. And immediately they left their nets and followed him. Those are some of the most mysterious words in the whole Scripture, it seems to me. How could it be that Simon Peter and Andrew and James and John, tough working-class men plying their trades as fishermen, how could they just drop their nets and follow this wandering rabbi? It's a story of call, of faith, commitment, following Christ. Those are big words, but often those words seem pretty far from the reality of the church we experience day in, day out. There was a poll not long ago in which people in various denominations were asked how much their faith meant to them. As you might guess, the fundamentalists and Southern Baptists by far ranked the highest, with more than 70% of their people saying their faith was very important to them. After them came the Mormons, and much further down the Catholics, and toward the bottom a cluster of denominations that we would know well: Methodists, Presbyterians, Disciples, and Episcopalians. Only 42% of Episcopalians said their faith was significantly important to them. Deep, passionate commitment seems to be hard to come by in many of our denominations these days. Over the years, in talking to people about their faith and about their unease over those big words like commitment and following Christ, I've often sensed a real pathos. I've heard many people talk about how empty their experience of the church had been growing up, or how wounding it had been, and how little experience of Christian love and friendship they'd ever found inside the church in their adulthood. And yet how they still hunger to be connected to a larger world of meaning and goodness beyond themselves. And my guess is that many of us here today share something of that pathos. At some level, we seek the living God. But in an age of high-tech, scientific analysis, the glare of the computer screen, and the endless cascade of social media postings, trusting in an unseen, mysterious God can be hard. My sense that we are often afraid to open ourselves too much, for fear either that we will find there really is nothing in this after all, or that there's more than we ever imagined. It's safer to be cautious. But what strikes me in the gospel this morning is the sheer impulsiveness of it all. Jesus walks up and says, "Follow me." It's a call from beyond those fishermen, something they'd never imagined. This was not part of their career plan, something intrusive, a challenge, an invitation that interrupted everything. A great mentor of mine, a wonderful poet, tried to capture the drama of this moment. And a piece of his poem goes like this. "I want to understand," he says, "how a man like this fisherman, or like a teamster or steel worker, how an ordinary working stiff could just be called away." He just calls, and they return the look or stare, and then they straight away leave their nets to follow. "And I wouldn't try it," he says, "on a tired working man unless I was God's son. He'd kick your rear end right off the pier." If they had been vagrants, I'd understand that. But how does a man whose movement day after day absolutely trusts the shape it fills put everything down and walk away? I'd pass up all the fancy stunting with Lazarus and the lepers to see that one. What happens in this dramatic moment? How can they make a decision like this? And then the biggest shock is they follow. We're inclined to marvel at their bravery and courage. Of course, they're free, we could say, to be impulsive. They're not like us complex, educated people. We have responsibilities. We wouldn't have gotten where we are without being careful, dutiful, minimizing the risks, making a plan. If we want guidance, we're more likely to get it from a therapist or a career counselor. But here, something just happens. Something from beyond those men grasps them. And it's as if they've been looking for it all their life. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book a few years ago called Blink, about how many of the important decisions we make in an instant. Who you fall in love with, what house you want to buy, what kind of work you want to do. Things have been stirring inside you for a long time, but then all of a sudden something clicks. It happens in the blink of an eye. Did you notice there is no talk in this story of those men signing on to a whole package of religious faith? These fishermen aren't asked to believe anything at first. No doctrines, no philosophical arguments, except no rules or requirements for admission. Jesus just says, come and follow. It seems that the only way they're going to know what Jesus is about is by going with him, sharing his life, listening to him, doing what he does. But all that following Christ takes for starters is a willingness to trust a hunch, to try it for themselves. The truth of life is not a package of ideas we think about and then begin to find our way into. It's a way of living, of being that we discover we can enter here and now. There's an unforgettable moment in Dostoevsky's novel, The Brothers Karamazov, in which a society woman comes to the wise spiritual leader, Father Zosima, asking for help in recovering her faith. How can I believe in God again, she asks. Zosima pauses quietly and then answers, you must learn to love. Try to love your neighbors. Love them actively and unceasingly. And as you learn to love them more and more, you'll be more and more convinced of God and of the immortality of your soul. What an unexpected way to go at this faith thing. Not first you must have faith, but rather love, and faith will come. Learn what it means to live like Christ, opening yourself to God and to those around you, and you will find God becoming real for you. Over and over, the great teachers of our faith have said that we can never simply know God with our minds. We can know a lot about God, about what God does, about what God might be like, but knowing God requires giving ourselves, opening ourselves, taking the risk of trusting, entering into a relationship, however mysterious that might be. And that's so much of the problem we often see with the spiritual marketplace of people plucking bits of religion here and there, trying a little Christianity, a little meditation, a little New Age, and a little of some of the other religious traditions. These are all deep wells of truth that can lead us far down into the mystery. But we have to give ourselves fully to one of them. And we Christians believe that in Jesus, we can go all the way down into the heart of God. Not many calls to follow are as dramatic as the one we are hearing about in our gospel today. For one thing, we Christians believe that God calls everyone, not simply a few chosen ones like this. Sometimes those calls are dramatic, as this one was, but mostly God comes to us quietly, often so quietly we could easily miss. God has work for us all to do, and God is providing glimmers and openings and words being said if we can learn to pay attention. God calls us to regular jobs, not telling all of us to put down whatever nets we have, but to probably stay where we are in our job, if not making a creative move, but to stay and look for God's call for us to be there in the workplace, whether it's driving a bus or raising children or growing crops or building a great high-rise or taking to a client a new proposal. In the midst of all of those things, we can look for the call of freedom, the call of living openly, the call of being ready to give ourselves away, the call of being willing to risk ourselves for the sake of this expanding love Christ wants to bring. Also, we need to be aware that God speaks through not just one voice directly as he did in Jesus, but God speaks through voices all around us all the time. I have heard the word of God from a child saying something to me I needed to listen to. Our colleagues, old friends, spiritual directors, honest friends who are ready to challenge us may be the very places that God speaks to us and calls us in some way to lay down some net and follow. I do have to say it's reassuring to know that the disciples Jesus did call were hardly paragons of virtue and hardly admirable people all the time. They could be cowardly, thick-headed, mean-spirited, competitive, and fearful. They made terrible mistakes and abandoned their Lord at the end. So if you were not so great all the time in your prayer life, if you've had some temper issues over time, if you're fearful and timid and selfish on occasion, then congratulations, you have the makings of being a disciple. All it takes to be a Christian or respond to a call is to say yes and follow this glimmer, this invitation to a bigger life when it comes your way. That's where God, we believe, meets us. Walter Brueggemann, the great Old Testament scholar who was with us last year, once wrote that the greatest heresy of our time is the notion that it is possible to live well what ends up being an uncalled life, a life that has no reference point beyond itself, a life that has no more to offer than looking after yourself. We need a calling. Will Willimon, the former dean of Duke Chapel, told me some time ago about the first time that Wendy Kopp, the founder of Teach for America, visited the Duke University campus. She came to pitch this brand new thing she was starting called Teach for America, aimed at the brightest college graduates of all, teaching them to work for 2 years in the poorest schools in the country. There have been a few posters around, but not that many, and Will was amazed to find that when she showed up, about 300 or 400 other people showed up to listen. And so, in a low-key way, Wendy Kopp explained to these ambitious, talented college seniors that, well, it really isn't that much of a job. You'll be working in some of the worst schools in our country. Many of them won't have decent textbooks. A fair number of the kids will be from broken families, and some will be very hard to handle. It could be a dangerous time for you. The hours will be long, and the pay will be barely enough to live on. It'll probably be the hardest thing you ever do. So she said, if there are 2 or 3 of you here who would like to find out more, why don't you come on down? And you can put your name on a list. Thanks for listening. Good luck with your careers. Have a great day. And Will said that these bright, privileged students, with their whole futures in front of them, started jamming the aisles to come down front to put their names on the list on an impulse, in a moment. It seems they had heard a call. He's here again today, you know, this man Jesus. And his invitation is as fresh and new as it ever was. Our lives are overflowing with complexity, but today he makes it all so simple. Here in our busy, driven lives that pull us in so many directions, we may have 1,000 questions. We may be leery of going overboard. We may think someday, but not yet. But today he's here to say, Set aside the analyzing, all the weighing. You'll never know for sure that way. Come and follow me. And for the first time, or the 20th time, today we might just say yes and follow.